focusing too much on the size of the army tends to make the numbers totemic in themselves. I think the really important thing is to make sure, whatever the size of the army is, and I would like to see it larger than the current planned reduction down to 73,000. But the important thing is that whatever the size of the army is, it's properly equipped and it's capable of doing its job. And what we've seen over quite a number of years, and it's been described as such, is a hollowing out of the army. I think even Ben Wallace himself has used that expression. It's no good having an army of whatever size if it's not capable of doing the job, it hasn't got the right amount of equipment. And of course, this is the uncomfortable thing for the Treasury. Warfare and technology moves on. So the Army, indeed the Navy and the Air Force, need to have equipment at the highest cutting edge of technology. But there are old-fashioned aspects to warfare as well, which of course is what the war in Ukraine has demonstrated. So the future army has to be a blend of high-tech modern equipment, but also keeping capable amounts of the more traditional equipment, such as main battle tanks, self-propelled artillery, and armored infantry fighting vehicles. And we haven't got sufficient plans and resourcing to do all those things at the present moment.
And with Ben Wallace saying that he's stepping down anyway. I mean, obviously, we don't know, who's going to be defense secretary, who's going to be in power, and then over the next couple of years. But is that something that you're concerned about? You seem to be talking about him as a great supporter of the ideas that you also hold dear.
Well, in fairness to Ben Wallace, he has fought a pretty bloody battle with the Treasury for most of the time, if not all of the time, that he's been Defence Secretary. And he's fought a battle against a very changing set of circumstances. Last year, when you recall, we had a very many number of prime ministers. We had Jeremy Hunt calling for 3% of GDP to be spent on defence. We had Liz Truss, when she was prime minister, calling for it. We've got Rishi Sunak talking about 2.5%. So there is a fluctuating picture as far as defence spending is concerned. At the present moment, we're only just over 2%. If we want to take the defence of this country and our contribution to European security and NATO seriously, we have got to increase the amount of money that the government spends on defence. And that's what Ben Wallace has been arguing for. And I think, frankly, at the end of 4 years as Defence Secretary, he's had enough. And he's going to stand down from Parliament because his constituency goes. But I don't criticise him. I criticise the overall stance that the government has taken of not being prepared to increase the amount of defence, the amount of money we're spending on defence.
How much of this, we've been talking about climate change, excuse me, this morning, Lord Dannatt, and we were talking about what, heat waves and what's happening in Europe and then what we can actually do here. And there is a kind of political narrative right now from some quarters that, we can't be doing with net zero right now. We've got more important immediate things, in other words, the cost of living, etc. And there are people, of course, who will kick against that and say that's not true. You always need to be worried about this. It's an ongoing battle. Is there a similar argument to be made here that you have to get the balance right between having a healthy military that makes clear that we or whoever is a serious power, while not wasting money or attributing money to that when times are tough and when everyone needs some of that money?
Well, what you're getting at is the overall challenge that is faced by government, and that is to set spending priorities. I'm afraid you have to come back to the age-old argument, which is true, that the first duty of government is to adequately prepare, yes, prepare is a good enough word, for the defence of this country and the safety and security of its people. And the integrated review, which originally was published in 2021, made a reasonable stab at trying to look at what Britain felt that it needed to do across the world in defence terms in the future. And we saw this much vaunted tilt towards the Indo-Pacific. Fine. China is, of course, a rising concern, but principally China is America's concern. America needs to challenge and compete, particularly with China in the Pacific. And the Pacific is very much America's backyard, if you look the other way, as it were. But we have made some kind of provision to be able to support the Americans. There's no problem with that. But it's the overall balance within defence that we're not getting right. And of course, the rude wake-up call is this brutal land war in Ukraine land war back in Europe again. And the disappointing thing is that the Integrated Review Refresh, which came out a few months ago, didn't sufficiently, to my mind and to many other commentators' mind, really acknowledge the change in the world circumstances. And you come back to the point that I made at the beginning. Yes, warfare is about modern technology, and that's really, really important. But there are ugly aspects of warfare that are old-fashioned, and you've got to continue to provide for them. And reducing our tank force, to be specific, from 220 odd down to 148, that's a significant reduction. Not replacing the Warrior infantry fighting vehicle with a modern version is another significant reduction to our capability. Do we think we're ever going to have to get involved in a war like Ukraine? Very hard to say. But if we haven't got the capability, we certainly won't be able to. And there is this rather nagging accusation that whereas countries like Poland in Europe are significantly increasing their land defense capability, maybe we're going to be hiding somewhat behind those allies. Is that the right thing to do, given the UK's reputation and its pride in itself as being the leading military power in Europe?